Welcome to Leading Minds Revealed, the podcast that pulls back the curtain on how today's top leaders harness the power of mindfulness to conquer the fast-paced, ever-changing world of business. In each episode, we sit down with C-suite executives and leaders who share their strategies for navigating rapid change with skill and clarity. Join us as we uncover the transformative mindsets that drive extraordinary leadership. These insights aren't found in business books, and they'll revolutionize the way you lead. And now, here's your host, Michael Apollo.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Leading Minds Revealed. In this episode, we're going to explore some of the most pressing leadership tensions that many leaders are sort of grappling with right now, leading effectively in a world accelerating toward AI without losing that human core of leadership. You're going to learn how and why the future of leadership is not AI first, but human first in an AI-enabled world. What leaders are getting wrong about AI, cost, and workforce transformation, how to lead teams through fear, uncertainty, and rapid change, and how to create cultures of community, trust, and performance under pressure. My guest today has spent decades leading at the highest levels of technology and enterprise transformation. He's built and scaled businesses from startup to billion-dollar operations, led over 2,000 people as chief revenue officer at Epicor, and now advises boards and executives on growth, strategy, and leadership. Please welcome Scott Morgan to the show. Scott, so great to have you here.
Yeah, thrilled to be here, Michael. Thank you for that kind introduction.
My pleasure. I'm particularly excited to talk about the topics we're going to explore in today's podcast because, in particular, when we think about the human core of leadership and the human core of organizations, I've been having more and more conversations lately with that it's not tied to like a key performance indicator. It's almost like the bottom line is that core focus. And if the bottom line needs to be taken care of first and foremost, then that takes precedence over everything. And so it's really hard, I'm finding more and more, to create this conversation that human side matters. And so I really want to explore that. And when we look at leadership, I know in our previous meetings you've shared that leadership isn't a math problem, right? It's not something that we could just chat GPT it, right? And AI isn't going to answer all these leadership challenges that we face. But we're in a moment where AI is shaping how organizations do business at every level. So looking at AI and leadership right now, just on the outset, what do you think leaders are misunderstanding most about AI right now?
Thanks for the question, Michael, and for the lead up and context. The technology and the capabilities itself is not the problem. The chasm that we're all trying to cross right now is the adoption and the human interaction, the human consumption. And what you alluded to a moment ago, I think is really important. And that is the pace in which innovation and the proclivity of AI tools, it's gone so fast, right? The acceleration over the last few years is just, it's very brisk. And there is no one right answer. But the one risk that I continue to index on is that the humanization and the humanity of the businesses that we run, irrespective of the industry. I've spent the majority of my career in software and tech, but it is finding its way into every industry, healthcare, send services, manufacturing. But the kind of the unspoken reality that is now getting a little bit more press, so we're talking about it here today, is the fact that we have to adopt, we have to get comfortable with it, and we have to deploy. And I don't want to be reductive, but I tend to revert back to what I know. And this isn't the first really global and multidimensional change that has happened to industry that is being kind of forced on us, if you will. And so I mean, listen, it could be as simple as how it is that you deploy a project or a certain initiative in any organization. And that is, we can't lose the humanity of it and the impact that change is going to have on people. And, sound and proven practices around change management, I think, is something that every executive, every operator, irrespective of the industry, needs to spend some real time on. Or again, we risk this dehumanization of the workplace. And that, for me, the opportunity with artificial intelligence, augmented intelligence, accelerated intelligence, the opportunity is too big. I think it's really critical for us to just take a moment and pause And again, you alluded to this. What is the outcome that we're trying to achieve? How do we measure that outcome? And how do we ensure that the employees and the people that look to us for leadership or are ready for that, and ensuring that they have the knowledge and skills and abilities to go out there and again take advantage of this wonderful opportunity that AI presents.
What does that pressure actually look like and feel like from your experience? I know within my teams, we and reading a number of the research coming out of KPMG and a few of the big consulting firms, they're talking about that there is a lot of experimentation. We've entered into that phase right now. I know as well through some of the research we've been doing that there's fear, anxiety, but it comes from a number of realities, not only the technology itself, but the restructuring organizations are going
Mhm,
through, teams that are being restructured, hyper efficiency focus on expanding profit margins, meaning that team members might be feeling massive uncertainty,
mhm,
right? And yet they need to adopt this technology that may take their jobs.
mhm,
And so what I'm hearing is that there's sort of a lot of that going on right now. And I know in our team, we're just trying to figure things out.
mhm.
And so
Yes.
what have you noticed from your experience at Epcor? I know you were leading during a time of intense AI adoption pressure. What that look like for you as a leader and for your teams? And I think this could be really great for anybody really listening in and wishing to get a bit of an inside lens on the
Mhm.
reality of that from another
Y- y-
perspective.
Yeah, listen, I'll go back and we can talk about OCM and change management principles. And I think it's very applicable here. And it's something, again, the acceleration and the pressures that we all have, especially in the private equity world, venture capitalists, they look at this intense opportunity to reduce the cost basis, rotate capital, do things more efficiently, save money. And that's a very real conversation, almost to the extent that we're jumping off into content and utility and tool without really knowing what the advantage is and or the training models that are necessary. But again, that pressure is incredibly real. So you go back to just really good sound change management practices, creating awareness, solidifying the vision of what it is as executives and operators that we want to achieve. And I think that the knowledge and skills aspect of it and really spending time on enablement and education, that's where we're missing, again, that interconnectivity between what it is that we want to achieve and the huge opportunity that exists. And so we don't have to at an individual level and or a functional level. It doesn't have to be this huge 180-degree shift in how it is that we're doing work. But listen, I impress upon my teams, whether it is within the company or whether it's our customers and how it is that they're deploying some of these tools. It's become fluent in artificial intelligence within the context of your function. We use this 30% rule, right? We don't want to do the jobs that we're doing right now and deploy AI any more than 30% of whatever work needs to be accomplished. And so that's a fractional amount. And so you take iterative steps. Those iterative steps lead to big change, and it helps people get more comfortable with the jobs as it used to be versus the jobs that, again, VC and private equity ownerships are expecting us to deploy and index on.
I think it's really interesting. You speak about change management, and it's such a. I mean, that's an established. There's many of these change frameworks, right? And I think right now organizations are not lacking in terms of clear strategies, or maybe they're not as clear as can be. They're emergent strategies of where they want to go. But what it seems like there's the biggest gap is around really fostering that alignment within an organization. From some of the work that I've been looking at the human skills, and the research shows that 80 to 90% of change and or transformation stall or even fail because of that lack of that human training, that human element. And I know you've shared that how you're sort of almost like over indexing now on the human element.
Mm.
And how, like, I think there's it's almost at odds, right? Because you've got this big focus on this hyper efficiency, focusing on these workflows and finding ways to decrease costs. Yet on the flip side, the human element is so important to be able to foster that the ethos or that innovative
Mhm.
environment where you can create new ways of working. And what are some of the ways that divide can be bridged, and why is it more important now than ever to really focus on that human element? Why is that something that came up for you as a core driver for the business success that you've seen?
Yeah. Let's tease out an aspect of what really is at risk here. There's been a lot of press here lately on this rotation of deploying AI really before we understand kind of the maturity curve and how it's going to create value in companies. But the risk for me is the originality. You mentioned the ethos. I think that's important as well, right? Kind of that moral compass that can only be found in the human element of the companies that we run. But you reduce originality, the creativity, the critical thinking in the most simple form, the loss of human connection. We talk about the dehumanization of the workplace and people losing their jobs. And so again, I think the paradigm is shifting a little bit to where you're starting to see people talk about the risk, for example, of deploying AI and essentially displacing a lot of entry level jobs. And here we are, let's call 5, 10 years down the road. Those entry level jobs are what prepares and educates and gives experience to the leaders of tomorrow. So there's a huge potential gap that we're going to see in the workforce, right? Again, if we index too heavy, let's say going beyond the 30/70 rule in terms of using AI to improve efficiencies, do the work. But for me, look at AI as a partner, certainly from a leadership perspective, right? You got humans and you've got agents, but AI is a genuine partner. It's not a replacement. I think that we do need to really focus intensely on how much work is being done in the corporate environments with AI, right? Thereby removing some of the human element. We need to be really cognizant of that divide. And then otherwise, let's emphasize the importance of making intentional, human-oriented and grounded connections in the work that we do, right? The making space, if you will, for human-only activities and engagement and prioritizing the importance of creativity and collaboration, originality, and the moral compass that we need in order to make decisions that affect employees and customers.
Resonate with what you're sharing around really understanding and researching from a human centered perspective. Like, what is the experience? What does that workplace experience look like when we look at how we change how we do work? And I interviewed Mohan Reddy, who's the head of the Human Perception Lab at Stanford. He's the chief AI scientist for Cornerstone, where that's like their sole focus. And so it's quite
Mm,
fascinating. And he said that the human skills are still going to be needed, and they're going to be actually even more important, some of these core human skills. But what we're looking at from an AI perspective, how it's changing work, where previously we looked at roles, so it was
mm,
roles that defined work. Then it's become skills, like, do you have the skills needed to execute XYZ?
mhm,
And now the focus is on tasks. So how are we structuring tasks? What are the tasks that need to get done? But you inherently need like a human driver, right? You've got these agents that you could deploy, et cetera. So there are some of these core skills that humans have, like critical thinking, being
mm,
able to take in context, really understand that ethos a little bit. So I think that's really, really important. But what I'm feeling here and what I'm sensing is that there's this tremendous responsibility and pressure on leaders right now to lead through this change, to understand this new emerging technology, to create alignment across their people, to make really, really hard decisions and to communicate them effectively, and to then also foster like a human experience.
mhm.
What did that pressure look like directly on you? And and what were some of the ways that helped you manage through all those factors sort of coming in at once?
Yeah. The rotation of capital and capital allocation is a very real pressure that leaders and executives face today. irrespective of whether you're public or, again, in the equity markets or VC. It's a very, very real pressure. It's incumbent upon operating executives to rationalize that, right, and work in more of a bottoms up capacity. Again, if you go back to a change management model, right, an OCM framework, the importance of having the entire organization, regardless of how big it might be, a bottom up oriented initiative, right, so that they see the value in deploying an agent, for example, to better understand customer sentiment or market shifts or competitive threats. I mean, those are isolated, aspects of every industry. Individuals are responsible for that. So I think ultimately to balance, right, what that bottoms up engagement from your employees, number one. And then secondly, one of the kind of tactics, if you will, that as we started to talk more intensively about AI, it's also understanding the limitations, right? Again, there are things that artificial intelligence, whether it's generative or whether it's agentic deployments, whatever it might be, there are certain, limitations. Again, we talked about the judgment, the empathy, the creative limitations. Our roles as leaders is to ensure that there is some balance in that perspective, and then ultimately to prioritize the importance again of that human centric leadership and operating model. So again, looking at individual, how would you, for example, as someone that develops, an engineer, for example, how would you deploy in an isolated manner one agent or potentially two agents or a dozen agents, but look at the efficiencies that you're garnering. It's a shift and a redesign of the role, not necessarily a displacement. And the headlines are all about, layoffs and displacements and capital rotations. But the reality is that there are a myriad of jobs that will never go away, irrespective of the efficiency that we're able to tease out with automation or AI type of tools. And I think it's incumbent upon us as leaders here in, relatively speaking, kind of early days to keep perspective on what it can do, what it can't do, and how you need to redesign either the role and the remit as leaders or your own personal competencies to ensure that you're able to contribute and provide relevant value to the organization, regardless of the ebb and flows that may occur as adoption improves.
Mm. So what was some of the ways, like if we take it out from AI and focusing on integrating into organizations and
Mm.
into roles and then the change management component, but looking at it for you as a leader, how did you really support cultivating a high performing team's focus? Like what were some of the actions you would take? Maybe some examples of what was the impact of perhaps taking a really human focused approach? And then how did you foster that? And what was the outcome?
Yeah, yeah. So I think out of the AI topic for just a moment, as leaders, it's important for us to maintain, a management structure and an operational cadence to ensure that you're communicating openly. I like to refer to best practice communication as over communication, which ultimately instills transparency and trust in leadership and interpersonally. So you can't dismiss what is just good management practices during these intense, times of change. But one of the things that I've seen consistently, I've been part of these initiatives. I've also seen organizations that I've either customers or that I've consulted with use this really effectively. And that is kind of the gamification, if you will, of how it is that we're going to start introducing AI into certain aspects of work. And then it becomes, again, a bottoms up type of initiative across the organization where, I mean, the individuals that are doing the job know the job best, right? And where can they benefit from larger amounts of data sets that are curated to bring efficiency to the job that they're doing or insights to the work that may be occurring. But that's a very simple but a very effective strategy that I've experienced. I've led and then I've also consulted organizations towards.
Mm. And I mean, like when you look at like how you would at Epicor interact with your teams on a day-to-day basis, right? I know you shared how you'd really connect on a human element with them. You would just take those moments to check in and see how they are. They're really fostering that sense of openness and to be able to gain feedback. Like what would that look like on a day-to-day basis on how you would interact with your teams, and how did that from that human element that you mentioned you over-index on, like how does that translate to the impact? Like, what is the outcome of really those interactions? I'd love to know what those interactions are and like what are some of the outcomes that you've seen?
Yeah, yeah. Listen, part of my operating model is something that I would encourage every leader to do. One-on-one conversations, team format, whatever it might be, but start with the human element first. How you doing, right? And I think you and I talked about this, Michael, in an earlier conversation, especially in software tech and tech-oriented services. The work that we're doing, well, is in fact very technical, right? And the adoption of AI and in any type of automation or software platform, we're using it. We're intensely focused on the efficiencies that it can bring. And so when we go off to do the job, whatever that job might be, we're interacting more with technology than we are with people. And so those opportunities, again, whether it's a one-on-one scenario, whether it's a team format, you start with how you doing. It's as simple as that. And you get a sense for ambition, you get a sense for fears and anxieties, certain challenges that you might not otherwise know and or learn about if you don't take the opportunity to engage again on a more human element about a spouse, about a kid, about a travel circumstance that might have impacted their effectiveness later on during a week. But, just again, very simple things like that. Focus on empathy, build trust. And, it goes a long way when, organizations go off into their separate, often disparate functions to do the job. We're interacting more with technology these days than we are actually people.
Mhm. Yeah, I've been hearing more and more from just a number of leaders around how important it is to foster that type of environment within their teams, and it's interesting. Like, there's different ways to be able to start formalizing that and to embed those as regular activities that teams do on a regular basis, to have those check-ins, to have continuous retrospectives, to get to know each other out that beyond what the workplace interactions look like. And some of the research is pointing to the highest performing teams have those human factors and those human skills just really baked in. That
Mhm.
safety, the sense of trust, the empathy, the social cohesion, the ability to tune into each other. And this sort of brings me to the next question, which I found really interesting. We were talking about how selecting the right people for the team, how you prefer looking to motivation, really looking to those who have a bit more of those human skills rather than perhaps the quote unquote A players. Like, when you look at that, like what is your rationale for how you select the people that you want to bring into your team or the organization?
Yeah, I mean, there certainly has to be a baseline of IQ related competency for the role and the job. But I've always subscribed to the belief that that's something that you can build, right? That's something that you can create. And any organization, there's going to be a learning curve to it, how work gets done and the contextual relationship between what you've done and what you know and how that would apply to a given circumstance in a new organization, right? So yeah, I do index quite heavily on building teams and how those teams can carry culture. There's a principle that I subscribe to called interchangeability, right? And interchangeability means nothing more and very simply, Michael, in that if we're over communicating and we're transparent about the work that we do, irrespective of the function, that means I know enough about your work, you know enough about my work that irrespective of the environment, we can talk through that. And I think that ultimately builds trust. It lends itself to a degree of understanding because I'm not necessarily somebody that is going to write code. I'm not necessarily somebody that is going to manage directly the balance sheet, right? Or run an AP or an AR organization. However, I know enough about that work to where I respect it and vice versa, right? They know enough about my work because we talk openly, we are transparent, and they know enough about my work that they respect, especially as leaders. If you're not building effective teams, carrying culture and leading from the front, there's always going to be a degree of distrust or skepticism about what does this guy really do, day to day. Listen, I think it's incumbent upon, they see how the sausage is made. They see how decisions are being fostered. And again, how leadership really plays out day to day, right? 2 parts executive, 3 parts operator. But I think it's important to have that, open and engaging dialogue. Listen, as it relates to how you think about, diversity and how you think about A, B's, and C's, to use kind of that framework, the majority of organizations, are operated day to day by B players, right? And that's completely okay. Certainly we want to attract high performing A players to the organization, but the B players, so often, right? Because if we think about just simply a bell curve in any organization, the majority of companies today are made up of B players that either maybe at one point they were A players, but they've made a work life trade off to where, hey, listen, I'm going to step into a different type of role. Maybe it's a role with less responsibility, a more isolated or specialized type of remit. And, again, they're performing the job. They're, let's say, at 80, at 90% efficacy. But again, they make up the majority of most organizations today, and we shouldn't dismiss them. And again, I think that goes back to, creating a psychological safety in the environments that we operate. C players, we need to manage them accordingly. A players can be, quite psychopathic, and how it is that they do their job, and that takes a different skill set. But yeah, listen, the reality is that there's a bell curve in every organization, whether you associate it with Renumination or Alphabet. There's a bell curve in every organization that we run and operate. And B players, again, they contribute quite significantly to not just companies, but markets and the economic circumstance at large.
Yeah, it's, what I found interesting when we were exploring that previously is that A, B, or C, or however that categorization is happening, but it's it's taking B players whom have the emotional intelligence, those who deeply authentically care about what's happening in the organization, and those who are motivated to be involved and to excel in what they're doing, over perhaps those who are just purely performance driven.
Hmm.
And I found that being like the deciding factors, because these i- individuals who have that balanced approach, but also like that they're deeply connected to what they're doing, they're the ones that can learn really, and as
hmm
opposed to perhaps selecting the the high performer that can just sort of come in and be a bit of like a bull in the china shop, or not
hmm
consider all those other aspects. So it's really what I really stood out for me was that's just a well-rounded individual that that can grow into their role when selecting. And so I find it interesting, just sort of going through that sort of activity of being able to think through, how do we select and who are we selecting and what are we selecting individuals for the work that they're going to do. I
hmm
think it's always a great reflection to have.
Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic, and you touched on something, Michael, that I think is really important, and that is the being intentional about growth and upskilling, top skilling, opportunities. Any organization, whether you're taking an A or whether you're taking a B. B, maybe it's about skill set and IQ, and kind of alluded to this. Maybe the A players, it's about kind of softening the edges and collaborating more effectively, right, with their peers. As an example, there's always opportunities for growth, and I think whether you're indexing on the proliferation of AI and how companies adopt and maintaining humanity, or whether you're talking about, soft skills or even hard skills, subscribing as leaders during this intense period of change to a growth mindset, role shifts, for example, functional specialization shifts, for example, we have to develop our people, or ultimately they get developed elsewhere.
Mm. And so, shifting gears a little bit, you grew up in a military family, you lived internationally, you started your career in education. How did those early experiences sort of shape you in a way where you could sort of approach and sort of see things in the way that you've just shared?
Yeah, growing up overseas and in a military family, as you alluded to, there's two aspects of that. Number one, you're detached from extended family, right? So that nuclear body is really important. And both my parents were academics. in addition to my dad being in the military. So there's always been a really strong sense of service and a strong sense of stewardship. But the military aspect of it, brings to surface the importance of accountability. I tend to be very task oriented in the work that I do, almost to a fault, quite honestly, Michael. As I think about diversity in building teams, as I think about the criticality and importance of carrying culture, right? That deep sense of service and that balance with accountability, clear expectations, accountability. I think that yields to maintaining and operating high performance cultures, but with an important balance of empathy and service, steward leadership, if you will.
Very interesting. Yeah, I can imagine, just the need to sort of adapt to diverse perspectives and find community and a sense of belonging in different countries, different environments that you've had to go into, and then also the experience of your family being in military and that sense of connection to service wherever you are. It's I can see definitely how that all comes together and informed who you are. And you know, um, if you were to share one principle with our listeners, other leaders navigating this time of AI, uncertainty, change, teams, the pressure that they're all facing, so what would be that principle that you would share that could support them best through this time?
Let me emphasize the importance of cultivating psychological safety. It's critical. It's just absolutely critical. I was talking to a good friend of mine earlier today that does a lot of angel and pre-revenue work with AI companies. Interestingly enough, but we were talking this morning just about the really intense and at scale layoffs that are happening and across all sectors, by the way, and that the impact that it's having on the employees that are left to run the business and broader remits and again adopting and deploying new technologies, AI, of course, being one of them. But I think the importance, again, going back to how we started the conversation around not dehumanizing the workplace and ensuring that as leaders we're cultivating psychological safety in the work that we do. I think that's so critical. But maybe just in more simple terms is the importance of relatability as leaders. Because we're going through it too, right? We're going through the same related pressures as leaders, and I think that's a relatable characteristic that we should talk openly about. But organizations, in my experience, whether it's 10 employees or whether it's 2,000, the importance of relatability to everyone, irrespective of function, role, and placement in the hierarchy. Relatability is such a critical factor as leaders as you cultivate psychological safety. Ensure that you don't dehumanize yourself because of how quickly things are being forced on us and the pace in which we're having to make decisions, sometimes without all the information, by the way, but make decisions and to enact change. Don't lose the relatability for every single person across their organization. And the reality is, with fewer human resources and more reliance on technology, the contributions that every single one of those individuals make is so important. And we should talk about that openly. Again, that relatability to every individual and ensuring that they understand that the work that they're doing is important.
Awesome. Scott, if anybody wanted to connect with you or to follow your journey, what would be the best way to do that?
Yeah, LinkedIn is always the best place. It's a great forum for sharing ideas and staying connected.
Awesome. Well, we'll make sure to share your details in the description of the podcast. Scott, it's been just an incredibly insightful conversation here and your perspective on balancing technology with humanity and really how to uh, think about leadership and leading during this time when there's so many nuances. I think from like an eagle's eye view, you've really stimulated that perspective in my mind and I'm sure within our listeners. And it's something that can be very helpful as we traverse a very ambiguous environment. So thank you so much for being on Leading Minds Revealed.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. You've created a fantastic forum here, and I look forward to continuing to watch your journey and keep up the good work.
Thank you so much. And to our listeners, thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you on the next episode of Leading Minds Revealed.
Leading Minds Revealed podcast requires more than a conversation. It takes action, research, and collective wisdom. If today's episode resonated with you, we'd love to hear your insights. Join the conversation and help us shape the future together. We'll be back with more stories, strategies, and real-world solutions that are making a difference for everyone. In the meantime, be sure to subscribe, rate, write a review, and share it with someone you think would benefit from it too. Thanks for listening, and see you on the next episode.